Right, okay, talking of Christmas TV just wouldn't be the same if Mark Gatiss wasn't gracing our screens with a ghostly Christmas story. This year sees him star opposite Game of Thrones Kit Harington and Freddie Fox with an adaptation of Arthur Conan Doyle's short story, A Ghost Story for Christmas, lot number 249.
Let me in!
Heavens, I'm coming. All right! Smith! Great Scott, what's the matter?
Brandy! Get me brandy!
What has happened? White as cheek.
May I stay? I must stay. I don't think I can face that road again except by daylight.
Of course. I'll have Mrs. Burney make up the spare room.
There, you see it?
Some fellow?
A fellow?
I can scarcely see a thing out there. It's gone now.
I am my own man again now. I was never so unmanned before.
Goodness, you're shaking like an aspen leaf. What the devil can have frightened you so?
I have been within the hand grip of the devil, that is certain. Sit and I will tell you all. The whole black business. It is monstrous and incredible, but it is true. It is all true.
Oh, I've got shivers just listening to that. Our very own Paul English caught up with Mark, and as this is not his first ghost story at Christmas, he started by asking him what it is about getting spooky at this time of year that appeals to him.
I'm always asked this every Christmas, and so I have to say the same thing, really, because otherwise I'd just be changing my mind all the time. I think personally it's a connection between fireside storytelling, the fact that it's the end of the year, and that Christmas is actually, for all its jollity, is a kind of slightly melancholy time as well, that we're sort of looking backwards and looking forward. So weirdly, in a way, even more than Halloween, it seems like the time that something might happen, you know. and then, of course, Dickens, I think, is a huge part of it, that we associate it because of A Christmas Carol with visitations. But I don't know, they just go together, don't they? It's strange, like wine and cheese. They're meant to be together, I think.
Yeah, there is a certain feeling, and it's interesting that point you make about Halloween being the time that we're all forced to think about it, and Christmas it almost kind of creeps up on us a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that's what they should do, is they creep up on you.
Yeah. Okay, lot number 249. Tell us about the story for those that don't know.
Well, it's a short story by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. It's set in 1881. It's about 3 students. And one of them, Kit Harington, is a sort of square-jawed Victorian empire builder. Another, played by Colin Ryan, is from Siam and is a sort of rather more pale and interesting young man. And the third, Bellingham, played by Freddie Fox, is essentially a necromancer. He's an expert in Eastern languages, and he dabbles in things that he shouldn't. And he's bought a mummy in an auction, lot number 249, and obviously the mummy doesn't stay lying down.
Brilliantly doesn't stay lying down, and I felt what was quite a believable way, Mark, because we're so used to seeing things like, you know, the effects laid in things like The Walking Dead, and, you know, the way that zombies or mummies or you know, the undead have come back to life, represented, laden with CGI and all that kind of thing. This doesn't have that, and to me that makes it more believable.
Well, that's very sweet of you to say. I mean, we shot it in 4 days. We have very little money, but Dave and Lou Elsey did the makeup, who they're the best in the business. They did Dracula for me and Steve Moffat, and it's just wonderful. It's one of physical effects, though. You can't beat them, you know. You really can't. And one of my favourite shots in the film, which I've completely stolen from the Boris Karloff one, is just the little glint of light in the mummy's eye when it comes. You know, it's so spooky. It just does it, you know. And actually, the sound people put this fantastic kind of wet sound on these eyelids, as if they're opening for the first time in 4,000 years. It's horrible, kind of. I love it.
Oh my goodness, I could actually feel that there. It's a half-hour film, and it's obviously based on a short story. And I think in the days where we're able to binge watch entire series in an evening and so on, this almost feels as light as a butterfly. It kind of passes quite swiftly.
Yes, well, that's the slot. I mean, the Lawrence Gordon Clark's brilliant 1970s ones were roughly about 35, 40 minutes long. It's basically all we can afford, and as I say, I'm afraid I have to say, every year the BBC have been amazing. BBC Arts particularly, we scrape the money together because the slot doesn't really exist anymore. You see, it's a 1970s slot, a half-hour play, you know. So it's very difficult to find the resources. Thus far, we've always managed it, but it's tough. And so, you know, there's that. And then also there's the fact that it's sort of, if you go much longer than 35 minutes, it becomes a very different beast, I think. For instance, there's one of M.R. James's best stories, Casting the Runes. I have actually written a script for, but you can't do it in half an hour. It's a big story, big. It's got scale to it. And that's the sort of thing that it would probably take about 45 minutes. And then that has a slightly different flavor. And then equally, if you go longer, then you go into longer form. You start to make it into a kind of film, and then you've got to rethink how that works in terms of where the scares are and what kind of story you're telling, really.
You've adapted M.R. James's work in the past several times, Mark. Conan Doyle, does it feel like a different prospect?
Very much, yes. I mean, I have to say that this one happened because Lucy Worsley's documentary on Doyle was happening. So it was essentially a companion piece. And they said, if you can do a Doyle, we can find a little bit of money. And I said, I'll definitely do a Doyle. But it was actually a nice change. And he is obviously a very different writer. And the whole flavor of it is more of a kind of ripping yarn, I suppose. It's more of a horror story, actually, even though it's still about a revenant, I suppose. But nice to feel it still fits in the tradition.
What I was quite surprised by, was there's a certain sort of homoeroticism to this story that was something that I wasn't expecting.
Well, there is, and it's there in the story. You know, I think famously Alan Bennett quotes Tom Stoppard as saying that writers are like people who have to open their suitcases at the airport and suddenly discover there's all kinds of things mixed in with their dirty washing that they didn't know about. And I think a lot of that stuff is in the story. Really interesting undercurrents, and as to what is exactly lurking in the Englishman's sarcophagus, as it were. Bellingham, he says in the story, you know, he would not make a suitable partner for me. And I think that's Doyle being sort of judgmental about what he sees as the unhealthiness of Bellingham's character. But I just decided to celebrate it a bit more.
Yeah, you could sense that it had maybe been turned on its head for a modern audience.
Yeah, there is. Sure. And like a lot of Doyle stories, and M.R. James, it doesn't really have an ending. It fades out, and Bellingham sort of is beaten. And I thought, well, it needs a bit more of something to send us off to our Christmas dinner.
And was there a sense of how, in your research or your knowledge of this story, was there a sense of how that aspect of the story was received at the time when it was published?
I'm really interested in that kind of late 19th century. There's a sort of cult of manhood around people like Doyle and Kipling. They're very, it's all about clean-limbed fun and rowing and fencing and athletics. But you cannot escape its inherent homoeroticism. It's absolutely there. How much they knew what was bubbling under it, I don't know, but it's definitely there. There's a sort of aesthetic worship there going on of the male form, which is very tangible. It is, and it's in it's in some of the illustrations and stuff like that. There's a sort of slightly idealized quality to the people that Doyle admired. That they're very clean-limbed, I think.
Yeah, it definitely adds another layer of interest, I think, to the story, which is very, very compelling for its spookiness alone, and also I could almost smell those wooden panels and that, pipe smoke and those scents of whiskey and things that were being sort of handed around. It's so very vivid.
Well, it's a great location we found. It's a place called Rothamsted Manor. It's an agricultural college, and I don't know why we've never found it before, because it's got almost everything. Room after room after room that we could have used. Some of them were like, it pained me not to put them on the screen because they were so perfect. The first part of the building was built in 1212, I think. So it's just panels everywhere. And, that in terms of trying to create a college, you got all that on screen straight away. You don't have to worry about hiding anything, really.
Yeah. Well, listen, I love it for its contrast in a time of, where we're laden with a lot of kind of glitter and bright lights and shiny floors and all the rest of it. I quite like the fact that there's a little bit of contrast going on
It's
there.
I hope it's a lot of fun as well, but it's nice to have a little. I think to me that's what Christmas is about. It's not just glitter and baubles, because it is sad as well. There's a sadness to Christmas for a lot of people. People lose people at Christmas, but also they have memories of people, and I think somehow that's to me why the mixture works so nicely. It's it feels like the right thing to do, to reflect on some of the other spiritual things at this time of year.
That was Mark Gatiss talking to Paul English earlier today about his latest ghost story for Christmas, an adaptation of Arthur Conan Doyle's Lot Number 249. And you can catch A Ghost Story for Christmas on BBC Two and the BBC iPlayer at 10 p.m. on Christmas Eve.